Silvia Creek, right below the dam at Lake Sylvia State Park. I'll start off by showing you some native plants. Right here we have goat's beard. So this is the beginning of the inflorescence. And when they flower out, they're a white flower. And goat's beard has these long leaves with serrated edges, and they're all branched like so on the opposite sides. You can see it kind of has red stem. Beautiful plant. We have some more back there. Right here we have a Salmonberry. It has kind of reddish stems, and it's got these thorns on the stems, but they're not like super spiky. They're not like Himalayan Blackberry. But we've also got serrated leaves, but these have deeper serrations, and they're not as long as the goat's beard. They're wider, and they kind of have this almost three-pronged leaf at the very tip. Right down here we have a little small alder growing out of the stump, and the alder has these beautiful leaves that are somewhat serrated on the edge, but have these deep veins that go all the way out to the tips of the leaves. And I'll show you another example later on a bigger tree of some other identifying factors. As we continue down along our creek, we see we have Fringe Cup here. So Fringe Cup is this gorgeous plant right here. It has these kind of deep burgundy flowers. They can range to almost pink, and they have these hair-like things like fringing out from the outer edges of the flower. And then they have these kind of soft leaves that have little hairs on them. They feel kind of fuzzy to the touch, and they have this kind of serrated edge look to them. You can go down and see a bigger leaf. So they leaf in opposites. Here's more up here. Our Fringe Cup. And then we come down here and we have our Bracken Fern. So our Bracken Fern is identified by these leaves that are opposite of each other, and instead of being like a sword fern, instead of being like a sword fern, they have individual leaves coming off opposite to each other. They come out like so. And we come over here and we have a beautiful skunk cabbage. They have another invasive right here. So this is spotted jewelweed. And you have to wait until it goes into flower to know for sure that it is spotted jewelweed. It'll have kind of an orangish, yellowish flower, and then there'll be like reddish spots on the flower. And it'll have a hooked, I forget what that piece is called, but it's hooked on the back side. That's how you can tell it's spotted jewelweed. But I am pretty sure this is. I've seen it here last year. So the leaves are very, very, very soft. And they're kind of this oval serrated shape. And if you can see here, if we pull this one, it kind of has a red stem right here. And these can resprout when you pull them from the ground. So you've got to be careful when you do pull them to get rid of them that you put them on a surface that they can't resprout. feature down here. You see that we have a sumac tree. So here we go. These are, the leaves are kind of shiny colored, and the veins go all the way out to the edge of the leaf. The new foliage is bright green. There's your sumac. Here we have another red elderberry, and we can see that this is what the flowers look like when they go into flower. Those flowers look old, and those will turn into red berries. Each one. Here we have some bleeding hearts in with our Fringe Cup. So here are the flowers of the bleeding heart. They're kind of heart-shaped. And these are very light pink, but I've seen them to almost dark purple. And they've got, this is a different plant, but this is the leaves of the bleeding heart. So very lace-like and branching with very serrated edges. It's a leaf to our bleeding heart. It looks like we have a cow parsnip here. And this will bloom out to become a white flower. It has this really cool stem, hairy stem, large, big leaves. They're kind of hairy. You want to pretty much stay away from anything that looks like it, because it could be giant hogweed. And giant hogweed, if you touch it, your skin will become very photosensitive and you can blister up, and it can give you a very, very bad rash. So you do not want to touch this plant unless you know it is cow parsnip. But best to stay away from them. Anything with these big leaves and this kind of hairy stem. If it has purple splotches on the stem, you for sure want to stay away from it. Then it's for sure giant hogweed. But giant hogweed can grow up to 10 feet tall. This cow parsnip is about 3 feet tall or so. Here we have bed straw. So you can identify bed straw because it has these, it's hard to show you, but it has these whorls around the stem, and the whorl has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 leaves coming off of it. And when you pick it up, it is very clingy. So it will cling to your pants like so. It has hooked little hair-like projections on the undersides of the leaves and on the stem that make it very sticky. Here's another example of our red alder. Kind of oval-like leaves, remember? And so on the stem, it's hard to see in the camera, but those white little splotches on the stem are called lenticels, and that is for air exchange for our red alder. Where you have red alder, if there is downed red alder or dead red alder, you will typically see in the springtime oyster mushrooms growing on the red alder. Now these are old oyster mushrooms. They never got picked and eaten, but they're just old. You wouldn't want to pick them right now. They wouldn't taste very good. But oyster mushrooms are very tasty. And people harvest them off of downed alder trees. This looks like either a beaver dam or a log jam in Silvia Creek. And it provides a lot of habitat diversity for our salmon and our crawdads and our other organisms that live in our creeks. So if you can see, under this wood there's a nice big pool under there that's nice and dark for our little fishies to hang out in. This logjam actually splits the creek into two separate flows. There's some going over this way, under those logs. And as you can see, the water in here is very slow moving. Great habitat for our juvenile salmon, or even our adults, to hang out, relax in, feed in. So this is essential habitat for them. These dark, deep pools keep the water nice and cool during hot summer days. And this wonderful riparian vegetation provides a lot of shade for our stream, which then keeps our salmon cool during warm days. Just like we would want to hide under a big tree on a hot summer day, so do our salmon. So big wood in our streams is very healthy for salmon and our other organisms that live in our streams. There's also oyster mushrooms on that log over there. So we also need a healthy riparian cover in our streams because our vegetation, the roots dig deep into the soil and they keep it in place. So over here is a good example. The river is kind of starting to wash out this side because of this log jam, and that's natural. But we have our native vegetation, see the roots in the banks here? It's holding this bank in place and decreasing erosion. So all these red elderberries and larger plants have big deep roots, keeping that bank from eroding. So they keep our streams clean as well, so they filter out pollutants through uptake of water, and they slow down that water before it reaches our stream, so it's not flushing pollutants straight into our stream. So they help provide cool, clean, consistent water. Here we are deeper into our riparian zone. So the riparian zone is the vegetation adjacent to the creek. In this area we have our sword fern. It has shiny, this is a new growth, shiny green vegetation. And they haven't produced their spores on the back side yet. But from last year, they have these spores on the back sides of their leaves that they reproduce from. There's some more of our bracken fern, so you can see the difference between our sword fern and our bracken fern. So sword fern is on the left in my hand, and the bracken fern is on the right. More bed straw, very sticky, and another cedar over there. So we'll go explore the bark of the cedar. So the bark of the western red cedar is very peely, so it kind of comes off like so, but it comes up in strips along the surface. Check out the bark. Very different than any of our other native trees' bark. It's used by Native Americans to weave baskets. And cedar has antifungal, antimicrobial components that make it really good for building things out of. So here we have a better example of our salmonberry. So our salmonberry have these bright pink flowers. So here's a salmonberry starting to form right there. And they'll be kind of yellow, orangish when they are ripe. And they're delicious to eat. Here's some little licorice ferns growing off of this alder. Little licorice ferns. Lots of clover covering the understory. Here we have our native blackberry. So you can tell the difference between our native blackberry and the Himalayan blackberry is that our native has this kind of bluish stem, and it's a round stem, and the pokies on it are very small and not as spiny and hooky as the Himalayan blackberry. Has these dark green leaves that are kind of pokey on the underside. Here's a lot of our spotted jewelweed. Again, we'd have to wait to see the flower to make sure it is, but in the way that it's clustered here makes me think that it is the invasive spotted jewelweed. Here is your Indian plum. The leaf branching is alternate, and it has these oval leaves that are very soft in texture. So it has white flowers when it leaves out, or when it flowers out. And it has, when those flowers mature, they mature into these berries that end up turning purple. And the birds will eat those. So this is Bohemian knotweed. As you can tell by the shape of the leaf. It's almost heart-shaped and fairly wide, but not as wide as long. And it has this stem that has these red spots on it. And right where the leaves branch off, it tends to be reddish or pink. This is a common invasive, hard one to get rid of. It normally takes an herbicide treatment to get rid of it. You cannot just chop it and leave it. If you chop pieces, they will regrow into new plants. So if you do chop it, you've got to make sure to burn it or bag it. There are also Japanese knotweed. The leaves are smaller than the Bohemian knotweed. And there's giant knotweed, which the leaves are much larger. And then there's Himalayan knotweed, and the Himalayan knotweed has skinny leaves. So it's right here next to our stream. It really likes the gravel banks of our streams, which causes a lot of problems because it dies back in the wintertime and the roots are very brittle. So instead of holding the bank in place like our nice native vegetation does, it doesn't. The bank breaks away and pulls chunks of those rhizomatic roots downstream and spreads it. So not good for our streams, bad for erosion. And here it hasn't yet taken over the whole bank, but in where you see a large patch, it will take over the whole entire bank and outcompete all of our native vegetation. So good to report it when you see it. Here we have a white Fringe Cup. It's not that orange burgundy color, it's white. Might be a slightly different species of Fringe Cup, but it has the same hairy leaf and hairy stem. And I'm seeing in this side channel here, this slower pool of water to the side of Silvia Creek, we have some freshwater mussels. And these are alive. I haven't seen a live freshwater mussel in a while. This is a western pearl shell. And as you can see, there are more of them in here. So some of them look like they've been eaten by maybe some wildlife, some raccoons or something. Here's one that looks like it was freshly eaten. Inside of their shell is nice and purple. It's gorgeous color. And I'm going to go underwater here to see if you can see them better. I am very surprised to see them here. Very cool find. They're really enjoying this side channel habitat right up against that log. Very cool. So we have nice deep pools created by our logs for our salmon and our western brook lamprey and our crawdads to hang out in, along with possibly freshwater mussels. And then we have swifter water areas, lots of diverse habitat created by our large-wave reef. And it slows down our water as it's moving down during flood stages and lets that water spread out into its floodplain and decreases flooding downstream. Here are some mature salmon berries. They've turned orangish yellow. Yummy eats. There's a fresh flower for you to witness right there. And some other berries starting to ripen. Here are some beautiful Devil's Club. So have these large leaves with this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lobed leaf. And they have very spiky stems. You do not want to grab hold of one of those. Those will hurt you. And their spikes like to stick deep in your skin. It's hard to get them out. And here is the inflorescence of the Devil's Club. And they have to be fairly mature or fairly old to be able to produce their flowers. And these turn into dark red berries later in the season. Here is our Sluice Edge, a very hardy sedge. And this is its inflorescence. And it has a thin blade. It's kind of sticky on the underside, I mean. Loves wet conditions. You'll find it a lot in the understory of forests and wet areas. Here's some more over here. The inflorescence. In Silvia Creek on Salmonscape, a Washington Fish and Wildlife resource, they say that Silvia Creek has both resident cutthroat trout and coho salmon. So our resident cutthroat trout, they may, below the dam where we're at currently, they may be able to make it out to Grays Harbor and out to the ocean to spend their adult part of their life cycle. And then they would return in the fall to winter and overwinter in Silvia Creek as a spawning adult. And then they spawn in the spring. They typically spawn between December through June, with peak spawn spawning in February. Eggs begin to hatch within 6 to 7 weeks of spawning. And the temperature, and depending on temperature, alevins emerge as fry between March and June. So right about now, with peak emergence in mid-April. So lake resident coastal cutthroat trout, which would be the trout that are above the dam. We're below the dam currently. They're found in moderately deep, cool lakes with adequate shallows and vegetation for good food production, just like Lake Silvia. And they would spawn up above Lake Silvia and the stream above, and they'd spend their whole life within Lake Silvia and Silvia Creek above the dam. Our Coho Salmon in Silvia Creek would return in fall, and they spawn during winter, and the eggs hatch in late winter to early spring after 6 to 7 weeks in the red. Once hatched, they remain mostly immobile in the red during the alevin life stage, which lasts for 6 to 7 weeks. And then as the alevin mature, they make their way out to the estuary, becoming fry and then smolts in the estuary. Smolts migrate to the ocean from late March through July. Some fish leave freshwater in the spring, spend summer in brackish estuarine ponds, and then return to freshwater in the fall. Coho salmon live in the saltwater in their adult part of their life cycle for 1 to 3 years before returning to spawn, so returning to our Silvia Creek to spawn. And it's important that they do, because nutrients from their carcasses after they spawn, lay their eggs, and die end up going back into the riparian vegetation, or it is then food for, indirect food for macroinvertebrates, which feed our young baby salmon. Here is one of the macroinvertebrates I talked about earlier. I caught him by shuffling my feet on the edge of the stream and holding a little net by my feet to catch anything that came off the rocks. Not something you want to do unless you're being really careful, because you really don't want to hurt any organisms that are in our stream, especially any salmon eggs that are under the rocks. But here we have hopefully you can see him. He's a stonefly. He has 2 tails. That indicates he's a stonefly. Take this off and see if we can see him better. He has gills on his sides so he can breathe underwater. And when the water becomes warm or not very oxygenated, he does push-ups to flush the water over his gills to get enough oxygen in his body. We'll start to look at our macroinvertebrates. Here we'll start with our mollusk, our right-handed snail. So you can see there's a bunch of right-handed snails in here. The right-handed snail indicates that this is good, that there's good water quality in Silvia Creek, because the right-handed snail is pollution intolerant. It can't stand very much pollution. right-handed because the opening is on the right-hand side of the shell when you turn it upwards. So pollution intolerant. We have good water quality. Here are a couple caddisflies in our stream. They are covered with little pine needles. So caddisflies make their home out of the environment around them, and they use their saliva, it's a silk-like thread, and they make their cases or their homes out of their environment around them. So these have chosen pine needles to make their homes out of. So if we pick one up right here, she looks like she's inside of this little cocoon. And these are great eats, for great food for our fry, our salmon fry that are making their way out to the estuary. Put her back in the stream very gently. That's a water beetle that you just saw. Here in this side channel, we can see a few egg masses. Now I'm not sure if these are egg masses of frogs or salamanders, but we'll take a peek underwater and see if we can check them out. Here is Silvia Creek, leading up to the dam I talked about earlier. So here is Lake Silvia. There's the upper portion of the dam over there. A lot of people are out fishing, probably for our cutthroat trout. So, thanks for watching. Hope you learned something.